Steve Chaggaris is here. Good to see you, our senior political editor. We've got Rick Davis. He ran John McCain's campaign back in 2008. Let's bring you into the conversation. The list that I was going through, Steve, there is an eclectic mix of speakers today, which will culminate at the end with the wife of Donald Trump, Melania Trump, taking the stage.
Can we just talk about Scott Baio?
Yes.
Chachi.
Charles in charge.
And Joni, Senator Joni Ernst.
Oh, yes.
From Iowa will be here. You mentioned Texas Governor Rick Perry, yep. Rudy Giuliani. Donald Trump will show up at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock and introduce his wife, Melania, who's going to be giving a speech on behalf of him.
Now, that's kind of interesting, right, Rick? Because generally the presumptive nominee, soon-to-be nominee, do they typically take the stage before they do their acceptance speech?
These are all just orchestrations of big moments for the convention, and there's a famous one where Ronald Reagan made a appearance.
Yes, at Jerry Ford's.
At Jerry Ford. Oh no, at his own convention.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, his appearance at Jerry Ford's convention was to try and beat Jerry Ford. We don't have that today, right. But we do have a situation where the spouses interact early. And that was a very famous moment of the convention, showing the love between two people in a convention hall that nobody's thinking love.
Right.
So,
right.
I think you've got a little bit of a repeat of that Reagan moment tonight.
It's going to be interesting to see, though, how Trump himself handles this, because as we've seen with Trump, he doesn't cede the spotlight very easily, and they've got to keep it, I think, very succinct and just toss to his wife, show that they're a lovely husband and wife, and move on. We'll see how he handles that.
We've seen a little bit of what you're talking about, Steve, in just the last couple of days. First, when Donald Trump introduced Governor Mike Pence on the stage, it was sort of like...
It wasn't a little bit.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
A lot of Trump. Oh, yeah, by the way, I want to introduce Mike Pence. And then yesterday, when Leslie Stahl interviewed him and Mike Pence on 60 Minutes, what's your impression, both of you, of that interview?
Well, I mean, my first impression is these are two people who don't know each other at all. And so you're really watching their relationship grow on television, on national TV. I thought the introduction, at some point, I think we were all waiting for him to step back and say, oh, by the way, there's a guy I'm introducing here who's my running mate. I'm going to spend the next few months running alongside for president, vice president. This is the ticket. It took him 26 minutes to get there. But in the Leslie Stahl interview, there were definitely moments where she called out some differences on issues, and they didn't have a great sort of way of answering those questions. They're going to have to get there. We knew the moment
I think the way they answered the questions was, this is my position, I'm Donald Trump, and you will cede to my position, right? Regardless of what you've been to this point, you're now a Trump person.
But he wasn't that succinct in saying
No, he wasn't.
They've got to get there.
And I don't think they will. I think one of the lessons they're going to learn is the two of them should never be on TV together. Right?
Yeah, well, you're going to probably see, after this week, you're going to see Governor Pence sort of far away from where Donald Trump is campaigning. They're not going to campaign together, right? Or is the plan to see them on stage at several times going forward?
So traditionally, they'll roll out for a few days together as the ticket, and then they'll split off, and then they'll come back together at various points throughout. Probably the week before the election, they'll be back together for that entire week. That's usually what winds up happening. I can't imagine it's going to be much different there.
Yeah, I think it'll, probably transition to the same thing, and there will be a couple of moments, a day or two after the convention where they'll take off, but this is not a typical campaign in any stretch of the imagination. In fact, logistically, they're not really built out for two separate campaigns right now. So they're building that VP operation at a time when typically you'd just be handed off. You'll have a plane, you'll have a team, you'll have communications, logistics, and all that kind of thing. And they're running to catch up with that. At the same time, they're piecing together a convention. Right. So my guess is that they may stick together longer than you think, only because of getting that logistical setup for the VP is going to take a little bit of time.
There is also the reconciliation, for example, of the Iraq vote, right, which Donald Trump keeps saying that he was against the war in Iraq. Obviously, Governor Pence, when he was a congressman, he supported that. When George Bush became vice president to Ronald Reagan said, look, we've been on different sides of the coin on several issues, but now that you're with me, you're on my platform. Can we see the same thing happening here?
Oh, for sure. People in my generation remember voodoo economics.
Voodoo economics, economics.
George H.W. Bush, beat up Ronald Reagan pretty hard on that stuff. And from the minute that he was the vice presidential nominee, voodoo economics disappeared, and support for the principal's approach to economic policy was adopted and stayed that way for 8 years. So I think there's a realization that part of the deal you cut when you become a vice president, when you say yes, you're taking your issues and setting them aside. That said, he does bring Governor Pence a really good record on economic policy, something Trump doesn't have a whole lot of experience in other than running companies.
Right.
And so I think that's a really important addition to the team, where I think Trump will accede to some of Pence's views on that, not the other way around.
The interesting thing about the Iraq vote, though, is that that's there. That's not going away. That's not changing.
Right.
You can't hide it now. You voted. That's what the record says. So I'm going to be interested to see if Trump backs off on that one criticism of Hillary Clinton. He's been using that a lot.
Oh, I don't think so.
Well, he said yesterday for her.
In his 60 Minutes interview, he's like, I'm still going after her, but I'm going to give Pence a pass.
Well, she doesn't get a pass. He does.
And most of the Senate voted for that bill, right? There's going to be very few Republicans who were in the Senate at that point. I think there were no Republicans.
Hillary voted along with Republicans on that bill, not the other way around.
So any senator who was in, or any member of Congress, really, who was a Republican who was in office at that point, you're going to have trouble finding one who didn't vote for that.
And before I toss to my co-anchor, Rena Ninen in New York, I want to ask you guys one last question before we go to her, which is, Trump yesterday, when Leslie asked him about bringing Governor Pence on to secure that evangelical, that hard-right Christian conservative coalition, Trump said, well, I also won the evangelicals. I mean, in other words, he's not even ceding the fact that he brought in Governor Pence to sort of balance his ticket.
Well, I mean, that specific point, I mean, he did do well among the evangelicals in the primaries. There are a lot of other reasons that he brought Pence into the ticket, and a lot of that has to do with establishment Republicans. That's the real group of Republicans that aren't on board with Trump. And who knows if they'll jump on board just because of Pence. We're getting some positive reaction from establishment Republicans about the Pence selection. And that was the point of that, is really to try to unify the party. It's taken Trump 2+ months to get to this point, and it took him to bring on another person to get even close to something moving toward unity. I mean, he really sort of bungled that communication with establishment Republicans. And so this move was really designed to speak to that group of Republicans.